Welcome to our channel. Get ready for a collection of incredible stories that will send shivers down your spine. If you love mystery and horror, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more thrilling content. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the stories. Rumors travel fast. Especially if they are related to a love triangle, sex, the use of various drugs, and the murder of one of the relatives. All this is commonplace, found everywhere, but has anyone ever heard of African shamans organizing their voodoo rituals in a cemetery in the Russian countryside? Absurd, of course, but such a delusional rumor spread around our village like hotcakes. Who would have thought that such a thing was possible? Inexplicable, but true. Has anyone seen them in person? Do they really exist? In the eavesdropping of the village in one well-known social network is full of various eyewitness videos from the cemetery, which allegedly depict those very shamans from Africa. Most of it is outright nonsense and staging, but there are a couple of clips that at least somehow pull on the evidence. It is not difficult to hire a few Negroes in the city, bring them to the village, dress them up as natives, and let them go to the cemetery in the middle of the night, but still, why not? Maybe the cemetery really is inhabited by natives who came out of nowhere. When they first appeared, or rather the rumors about the natives, it was whispered that the dead had started walking around. At night they got up from their graves and wandered around the cemetery, some even went out into the settlement. A lot of videos and photos already with the participation of walking corpses can be found in the eavesdropping of our village. There is enough different staging there too, but something curious can be found. Live witnesses are present, but who would believe elderly people? And so, for the sake of interest, I decided to find out a little about what was going on in the cemetery of our village. Having brought a couple of friends, Oleg and Maxim, we went to our mystical place in the evening. I took an axe, just in case I had to defend myself. Oleg also brought a small homemade baton with nails. Maxim didn't take anything, relying on us. He's weak, he can hardly cope, but he's good at hiding. If something terrible happens, and Oleg and I have to fall in battle, Maxim will surely survive and tell everyone about us. Whether they'll believe it or not, we don't know, but at least they'll be interested in our disappearance. Once we were in the cemetery, we found a secluded place to wait for the night. It was getting dark, the darkness was gradually enveloping us, and the coolness made us pretend to be wild natives. It was all right, scientific interest above all. The moon stood high in the night sky, brightly illuminating the ominous cemetery. It's been a long time since we came here and we haven't seen anything of the sort. We have no intention of giving up just yet. Until morning comes, we will still be guarding the graveyard. Our expectations were eventually fulfilled. The three of us headed for the source of the noise, as if someone had actually decided to perform a ritual. The three of us went to the source of the noise. Me and Oleg took out a gun. We tried not to make too much noise, it was scary after all. Whoever it was, but obviously crazy people, if they decided to hang out in the cemetery. There was a glimmer of a fire ahead, and shadows moving in an incomprehensible dance. When we came a little closer, we saw a scene. Several black natives were spinning around the fire, humming something in their own language. Near them stood several living dead men, some of them were still fresh and seemed to be ordinary people, the rest were rotting, with parasites inside, but they stood firmly and watched the savages. We witnessed the confirmation of the tale of our cemetery, but what now? The only thing left to do was to leave quietly. Only we were about to turn back, when suddenly Maxim gave away our location. It was a bad idea to take him, he's good at hiding, but physically he's not so good. He couldn't help himself when we turned and rolled to the campfire. The natives noticed Max and immediately grabbed their spears. "Guys! Help!" was the last thing we heard before Maxim was stabbed. With my friend's death screams, Oleg and I had to leave my friend. Fear overcame courage. The two of us headed out of the cemetery while those savages were shouting something. It would have been so easy. We were immediately chased. And the worst part was the walking zombies were chasing us. We sped forward, and only forward. Literally jumped over graves, only to get away from the undead pursuers. Oleg fell behind me. Out of nowhere one of the living dead jumped on him. He tried to struggle, but his strength was not even. I kept running, enduring the pain in my lungs, saving my own skin above all else. When I was caught, I was exhausted, tripped over something and fell just under the dead men's feet. Their slimy, hard hands grabbed me and dragged me back to the savages. I tried to resist, too weak for such a thing. I found myself once more near the fire. The savages surrounded me, examining and groping me. Beside the fire lay the corpses of my friends, their bellies ripped open, all their entrails burning in the fire. Their lifeless eyes stared at me, their heads on their spears, their blood trickling onto the clay bowls. Would I die this way, too? And that was just one chilling tale, but we're not done yet. Get ready, because the next story might be even more terrifying. Couldn't you have come closer? I asked, throwing off my heavy backpack, which was full of both useful things and all sorts of unnecessary nonsense, and weighed, as it seemed to me, half a ton. No, my friend, no way. You see, you can't squeeze through here on foot, let alone in a vehicle. Valera answered and, following my example, also freed himself from the load that he had been carrying on his shoulders all this time. Already 2 hours, as we are in this damned forest dragging, although you said that the hut, there it is, hand in hand. Grumbled Andreyuka and looked judgmentally at Valerka, and then sat down on a fallen tree trunk. Come on, stop whining, there's nothing left, about 20 minutes and we're there, muttered Valerka, and then took out a bottle from his backpack and began to drink its contents in big gulps. Hey, Valer, maybe we're lost? I asked a question, looking around and noting that this forest area scares me a little. There was a certain feeling of uneasiness, and I didn't understand what it was connected with, because Valera had warned me that the place we were going to was full of anomalies and strange things. It would seem that the forest was like a forest, but there was something wrong with it. First of all, not a single sound was heard, only sometimes the trees creaked so loudly that it seemed as if one of them was about to collapse and crush us. Secondly, this section of the forest was so dense and overgrown with bushes and grass that it was extremely difficult to move, from what, in fact, we were weaving for some time almost in one place, although from the place where we left the car, and to the point of destination is not more than 3 kilometers, as Valera claimed. And the third and the strangest thing was that in this place there was a terrible cold, so much so that I really started to shake, although when we left the car outside it was incredibly hot. To everything else it was possible to notice that the sun's rays literally refused to penetrate through the crowns of trees, from what there was a feeling that here constantly reigned semi-darkness. Valerka wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Andrei. By the way, what is this hut and how did you know about it? He asked, finishing his sandwich and drinking hot tea from a thermos. It's quite a long story, but if you are really interested, I can tell you on the way, to break the boredom and distract from the monotony of the place. It's a deal, summarized Andreyuka, after which there was a sepulchral silence. Some more time we sat in complete silence, each thinking about his own, then Valera made it clear that it was time to move on, because it was good to sit, but still we would like to hurry up to the hut, and then we could relax. We nodded silently and, taking each of our luggage, followed our leader. Do you still want to know the history of the cabin? Asked our guide, looking around. Sure, said Andrei enthusiastically, who was walking ahead, sometimes whipping me in the face with branches of bushes, which he pushed aside to get through them, from which I began to freak out a little. This forest is so ancient that some people believe it has existed since the beginning of the universe. For as long as mankind can remember, this forest has always existed. Around him built a lot of legends and fables, many of which can be found on the World Wide Web, and about some of them and few people remember. But that's not the point. They say that there are strange and scary creatures, demons, witches, sorcerers, and other evil things. Some say that here are the gates of hell, others say that representatives of other civilizations fly here. There are those who believe that this piece of land is cursed, allegedly lived here before sectarians who worshipped all sorts of spirits, deities, and other worldly forces, did their dark deeds and shed a lot of blood of innocent people. I've gone off topic. Well, so, in the early 20th century, a certain scientist, I won't say his name, because I don't know, decided that it would be a good idea to check all the legends for truthfulness, and came to live in the local forest. Built himself a shack, not a bad one, by the way. Well, we'll be right there, check it out. He brought with him the most necessary things, and began to study the surrounding territories, at the same time writing down all the studies in his diary. No one knows what became of him, his body was never found. In the mid-90s, my father was hiding from the bandits here in these parts. I don't know what he did and why they were looking for him. I guess he got in touch with the wrong people, but he was in serious danger. He happened to stumble upon this hut, so he stayed here for a while until things settled down. His diet consisted mainly of mushrooms and berries, and sometimes he was lucky to catch some game, such as hare or deer. Also sometimes he spoiled himself with fish, as there was a pond nearby, small, but not quite tiny, the water from which could be safely consumed, so that the life of my father gradually got better. He liked the house so much that he decided to fix it up and put it in order, change the rotten paneling, fix the roof, and so on. When everything was more or less calmed down, and they forgot about him, or thought that his corpse had already rotted somewhere in the swamp, my father returned to the city, settled his life, got married, and then I was born. But he came here every summer and spent time here, if not 2 summers, then a month, and I couldn't understand why he was attracted to this place like a magnet. So, and the scientist, what about him and why did you tell me about him? Asked Andriuka, once again smacked me in the face with a branch. Gad, I thought to myself and hissed, but continued to walk silently and keep up. Ah, yes, the scientist. In general, my father found something there, some records, journals, studies of this place and different phenomena. And where is it all? I asked a question, gradually speeding up my step to avoid Andre, who was already annoying. Yes, somehow lost them, but my father told me a lot about them. Said Valerka, and then added. But once he told me something that I first laughed, thinking that he has such jokes, but seeing his face realized that in this case humor is not appropriate. So what are you waiting for? We are listening attentively. Joyfully squealed Andrew, like a boy who asks his grandfather to tell another story. Well, I'll try to convey everything in his words, it will be easier. That summer was extremely hot, as a result of which there were many forest fires. However, the area where the cabin is located, the fire miraculously bypassed, and even huge clouds of smoke that enveloped entire cities and regions did not penetrate the area. Some will call this phenomenon a miracle, others will say devilry, but that this case is unusual is a fact. I was spending my time in my own pleasure, hunting, gathering mushrooms and just walking through the forest, enjoying the local beauty and nature. In one unremarkable evening I decided to set traps, hoping to eat some game. Well, so, I set traps 5 pieces and with a calm soul went to the cabin to cook dinner and do their business. The sun was slipping slowly to the horizon, and the forest was gradually enveloped in darkness. Sitting at the table, I cleaned the gun and tried to tune the radio at least on some wave, as suddenly through the interference and hissing I heard a howl, yes, so much so that it made my hair stand on end. For about half a minute there was a sepulchral silence, and then I heard the same howl again, only this time much louder and scarier. I quickly grabbed what I needed and ran outside. In one hand I had a flashlight, and in the other I clutched my rifle tightly. With a heavy sigh, I took a step forward, and at the same moment I smelled a strange odor, even stench. It smelled of rot, of decaying flesh, of death. I could smell it in my gut. As I stood there shining my flashlight in all directions, hoping to see something, I heard the clinking of the chains with which I was tying the traps to the nearest trees. At that moment I realized that the one who was caught in the trap could not get out of it, but he had somehow managed to break the chain and was now moving towards me with great speed. I ran into the hut, locked the door and hid, trying not to breathe. Soon I heard a blow on the door with such force that I thought it would fly out with the hinges, and what was on the other side would just come in and tear me apart. But the door miraculously survived, and then the intruder switched to the window, which, by the way, knocked down with one blow and began to crawl into the house. I almost went crazy with fear, my hands shook like Parkinson's disease, and a lump rose across my throat. The thing was already inside the room, and I could hear it clearly, but I was afraid to come out of my hiding place, not even the double barrel I'd been cradling all this time. The creature growled, and everything inside me clenched, and when it was so close, I took a desperate step. Jumping out of hiding, I shined my flashlight in its face, blinding it, hoping to buy it some time, and started moving toward the door, trying to get out of the cabin. The thing that was in the same room with me and stood literally 2 meters away from me could not be described in words. It was not a man or even a beast, it was something not of our world. A huge head, from which protruded a multitude of limbs and outgrowths, reminiscent of underdeveloped human hands, huge round eyes with dark red veins, and I swear that each of them had 3 pupils. A huge mouth, from which protruded large, curved fangs, like the tusks of an elephant, and innumerable small, sharp teeth. The monster had 3 legs, but they grew out of proportion to the body, as if some mad doctor had sewn them chaotically to the torso. One of them had one of my traps on it. In addition, the monster had 2 powerful paws, long almost to the ground. I staggered backward and watched the whole scene, and I could not understand how and from where this creature had come to our world. At one point the hell spawn made an attempt to pounce on me, but good reaction and training made itself felt, and I managed to pull the trigger before it did. The bullet struck it in the chest area, sending it tumbling to the floor, breaking several floorboards in the process. But, unfortunately, the creature was quicker than I expected, and before I knew it, it was speeding toward me. The second shot was quite unfortunate, the bullet hit the creature's fang, thus causing almost no damage to the creature. I should have used turbine bullets instead of this, I thought to myself as the monster took a step away from me. In one easy motion, he broke my hand, where I was holding the gun in the forearm area, and then he grabbed me by the neck and lifted me up to the height of my arm, staring intently into my eyes. I had already said goodbye to my life several times in my mind, but when the creature was about to bite my head off, I remembered the knife that was attached to my belt. I pulled it out, raised my hand and stabbed the monster in the left eye, then felt my ribs break against the wall as the creature threw me with incredible force, then jumped out the already broken window with the knife in its head and disappeared. I made several attempts to get up, but it was all in vain, my body wouldn't listen at all, and the pain was such that I sobbed like a wolf. A few minutes later I lost consciousness. "Such a story," said Valerka and fell silent. "And what's next?" asked Andre, who could see that he got a lot of impressions from the story. "And then nothing, my father came to himself in the evening of the next day, managed to give himself first aid, and the next morning reached the city, where he was already taken care of by doctors." "I understand," I said. "What is it?" both my companions asked in surprise. I understood why he came here every summer. "And why?" Andrew asked in bewilderment, looking at me like a fool. "Hunting that thing," I answered, noting that we had already reached our destination. "By the way, here it is, isn't it beautiful?" said Valera, proudly spreading his arms out to the sides. Indeed, the hut was quite large and well maintained, as if it were not a hut at all, but a real cottage. There was a small shed next to it, where, to all appearances, tools and other implements were kept, as well as an outdoor toilet. In general, so, I'll take care of the generator, you, Andrew, put a little order in the hut, and Sanyak will take over cooking meat and other snacks. "Questions?" said Valera, picking his pocket in search of the keys to the huge lock that prevented us from getting into the gut of the house. "No questions," I said, and almost immediately everyone started to fulfill their duties. After about 2 hours everything was done, and we were sitting around the fire with full stomachs, discussing various topics and just enjoying the nature and wonderful atmosphere. "You didn't come here to rest, did you?" I asked Valerka a question, at the moment when Andre went to get rid of the previously drunk drinks. "And you are not fooled?" he answered and smiled. "That thing does not give rest?" I continued. "Not exactly. my father dealt with that evil thing. That monster was the work of that scientist, I'm sure of it, and believe me, it's not his only experiment. Who knows what other creatures roam these parts, lurking, waiting, and perhaps even now watching us from the impenetrable thicket. And besides, there are enough anomalies and oddities here, which I warned you about before going to this place, so I don't advise you to leave our humble possessions in the dark. Issued Valera, poured the shot glasses, and continued. And again, you yourself wanted a thrill, dreamed of being in places that give you goosebumps and creepiness, here you go. Coming back, Andreyuka said that he felt unwell and that he would probably go to sleep or turn on some movie on the laptop, which downloaded in advance, but we just nodded and continued to talk about all sorts of nonsense. By the time it was completely dark, we decided to join our friend and check on him. When we went into one of the rooms, we saw the following picture. Andrew was sitting on the floor with his back to the exit and facing the wall. He was shaking as if he had spent 24 hours in the bitter cold, and coming closer, I noticed wisps of gray hair on his head. We did not get any clear answer to our questions, and our friend only moved and swayed from side to side. I was so disturbed by my friend's behavior that I did not immediately notice that in front of him on the wooden floor was an old VCR and the same ancient Sharp TV from the 90s, on the screen of which was displayed white noise. "Where did you get that?" shouted Valera at Andreyuka, who did not pay any attention to us, but only stared at one point. Realizing that this will not achieve anything, he came up and gave a smack to the inadequate comrade, after which he instantly came to his senses. "It just can't be," said Valera, frightened. "This electronics my father brought here together with the generator after my mother's death, and after a certain moment it disappeared." "Where did it come from?" repeated the question of the owner of the house. "I thought you were playing a joke on me," Andrei replied in a trembling voice. "When I entered the room, I noticed the arrows on the floor, which, as it seemed to me, were drawn with something like blood, slimy and disgusting, and led me straight to the wall, where the equipment was lying. There was a tape on the VCR, and my name was written on it with the same stuff as on the floor, so I thought it was your handiwork." "What did you see?" I asked. It was me on that video, damn it. The tape clearly shows me coming out of the cabin and running away, stumbling, falling, then getting up again and continuing to run through the woods with someone chasing me and filming me from behind, but I couldn't see who it was. Several times I turned around and my face was caught in the frame, which was distorted in a horrible grimace. After a while I fell exhausted into the bushes, and immediately someone invisible penetrated into the bushes, breaking branches and rustling leaves, and then there was a terrible scream. The scream was me, the one in the video, and a moment later everything went silent. The cameraman brought the camera closer to my face, and there, tears rolled down his cheek, and Andrei held his hands on his head and howled. I wanted to tell him to continue, but Valera stopped me, gesturing that we should go back to talk. We went into the kitchen, I lit a cigarette, and my friend poured himself a shot glass, drank it and immediately poured himself another. "He's a dead man," he said, and then angrily threw a bottle at the wall, the shards of which scattered all over the room. "What are you talking about?" I yelled at him. "You don't understand, he saw his death, saw what would happen to him soon. The moment he put the tape in the VCR, he found his death. Thanks to our scientist, who did his best. I do not know how he managed to do it, but he was able to encapsulate the ancient evil in electrical appliances. I can't say what apparatus was the original carrier of the spirit or what it is, all I know is that it can change the carrier. Imagine that it was encased in an ancient camera, then more modern technology appeared, and this entity or whatever it is moved itself from one device to another. It is cunning and insidious, capable of creating illusions and deception. It will try to lure you, make you do what it wants so badly. If it succeeds, you are dead, and no one will help you. That's all I know about it, everything my father told me about it. And one more thing, if you watch the video, you'll see how you're going to die, and no matter how hard you try to change anything, you won't be able to. The ending is always the same, the one on the tape. But we didn't watch it, so we're not in any danger," I said. "You're wrong," buddy, like I said, it will do everything it can to make us do exactly what it wants us to do. Hallucinations, visions, and other horrors are guaranteed, so get ready," added Valera, leaning back against the wall and sighing heavily. "Is there really no way out of this situation?" I sat down on the chair and put my hands on my head. "There is," replied my companion, "the only way out is to survive until dawn, but, frankly, I'm sure we won't make it. But we'll try," I mumbled, and at that moment I noticed a shadow flickering down the corridor. "Don't, you can't help him," said Valera at the moment when I was about to go out and catch up with Andriuka. A moment later the front door slammed shut, and through the open windows we heard someone's quick footsteps, then a thud, as if a sack of potatoes dropped on the asphalt, then the same footsteps, which gradually receded farther and farther away. Somewhere in the distance there was a horrible scream, which made me shudder, and then there was silence. "It's all my fault, his death is on my conscience, I knew I shouldn't have come here, I knew I shouldn't have agreed to this, I knew this place was full of evil and abnormality, why did I do it?" Valera covered his face with his hands and sobbed. "You're right, but alas, he cannot return, but we can try to survive on our own, we need to stick together, then our chances, maybe, and slightly, but increases, so let's better think about what we do next," I said, and he nodded approvingly. "We should try to blow the hell out of this thing," I summed up, and we walked carefully, small steps towards that room, and when we entered it, I noticed that there were 2 tapes on the VCR, the inscriptions on which said that they were meant for us. There was another oddity, neither TV nor VCR were connected to the power supply, and I did not understand how they, in principle, without electricity perform their functions. As I got closer, I grabbed the TV and threw it at the wall. However, to my surprise and regret, there was no change. "It's useless," said my buddy and sat down on the couch, and I followed suit. "We need to sit through the rest of the night, and then we'll stay alive until dawn, at least 5 hours, brace yourself, my friend." The next thing that happened was this. I began to see and hear things that could not be. Creepy writings appeared on the wall and on the ceiling, and right behind me someone whispered, "You're mine." I twitched and turned around, but, as you'd expect, there was no one there. As it turned out, Valera also saw and felt something, but with some differences, and we realized that each of us had our own nightmare. Somewhere to the left something roared, behind us there was a nasty sound like the crunching of bones. A thick black liquid dripped down from the cloths and walls, which got on my clothes, my face, in my eyes, and I could literally feel the stench in the room. In an instant, the lights went out, plunging us into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the TV screen, which had been displaying the same white noise and sometimes some horrible images. Someone grabbed my leg and dragged me toward the door, while I struggled, clawing at the wooden floor, tearing off my fingernails, screaming at the top of my voice, asking Valera to help, but he just looked at me, and I began to see his face contorted into a horrible, inhuman smile, the skin on his face as if it had been torn off and then put back on, crookedly and unevenly. The thing that had grabbed me began to gnaw at my leg, tearing off large chunks of flesh with its sharp claws and shoving them into its mouth, while I squealed and squirmed in pain, and then passed out. I jumped up from the couch in horror and grabbed my leg, groping it and realizing that everything was fine, there were no wounds or injuries. Everything I'd just experienced was nothing more than an illusion, but true enough that anyone would accept it as reality. Valera was sitting next to me, and from the looks of it, his consciousness was somewhere out there in the nightmares, and his gaze was blank. My companion stared at one point and for several minutes didn't blink once. I felt a slight breeze, and when I turned around, I saw that a strange, incomprehensible creature was coming through the window. I felt a slight breeze, and when I turned around, I saw that a strange creature was climbing through the window toward me. What entered the room resembled a human being, but only the top part. The lower part looked more like a huge caterpillar, with many small limbs on which it moved. In an instant, the creature grabbed my arm and broke it at the elbow, bending it backwards. I screamed, but immediately received a powerful blow to the stomach, and then the creature put its paw in my mouth and tore off my lower jaw with a crunch. Blood gushed out, and the creature pointed a pathetic-looking finger at the VCR, which still had one tape on it. Valurka, a thought flashed through my head, and then I came to my senses, and just like that time I was sitting on the couch, and all that was happening was another deception. I don't know what nightmares my comrade had to go through, but he couldn't stand it and watched the tape that was meant for him. He sat next to me and with humility in his eyes looked in front of him. Andriusha is waiting for me. Goodbye, my friend. He said, and then stood up, threw me the car keys and headed towards the exit. When the front door opened, I heard a terrible scream and the sound of tearing flesh, then the door slammed shut and there was silence. I was alone in this cursed place. But I made it through and met the dawn alive and well, but what I went through I will never forget. Those terrible creatures and beings, those worlds and dimensions, the pain, fear and hopelessness that I experienced that night will remain forever in my memories and will torment me at night more than once. I left the cabin that morning, but before I did, I burned it to the ground. It was the right thing to do. I ran through the woods, out of breath, scratching my face with branches, stumbling and falling, but I didn't want to give up. At a certain point I managed to get on the highway, and then reached the place where we had left the car. I was saved, but at what cost? 3 days after those events, I found a strange folder in my smartphone, and in it was a video file called For Alexander. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.